Welcome back to another episode of Closed. Really excited to be joined today by Ian Slater, the co-founder of Trove Partners, which operates out of Compass. It's one of the top luxury residential brokers in New York City. Ian and his partner, Michael Konecki. Did I say that right?
Close enough.
We got to start doing a segment where I say things wrong because it happens like every single intro. Konecki. So I said it wrong.
Correct.
They've built Trove into the #1 ranked large team in New York City per the Wall Street Journal. Over $2 billion in career sales, roughly 350 million annual transactions. Today, we're going to talk about a bunch of things. We're going to talk about the luxury market, the current state of the luxury market, the future of the luxury market in New York City. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world, how that intersects with what's happening here in Manhattan. But first off, Ian, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So why don't we start kind of big picture? Talk to us about how you started the team, how you grew the team, what you guys focus on.
Sure. So I'm 34 now. I'm one of 0.5% of real estate brokers, I believe, who got into real estate right out of college.
Okay.
So I was a college swimmer. I moved to New York. I became an intern for a team at Douglas Elliman. And then 4 years later, I started my own team at Compass. That was like 2016. I moved to Compass. It was before any of the major investment or anything in the company.
Mm-hmm. Right. Was it?
I want to say there were like 300 people there.
Was it still a tech forward company at that point in time?
It had that was always in its DNA.
Yeah.
But it had morphed from being like a rental tech brokerage into being an actual brokerage at that point.
Mm-hmm.
This is post Leonard Steinberg.
Yeah.
So I moved over and I started a team called Slater Team, which is just my name.
Yeah. Not that creative.
Very messy in the beginning, because I was like pretty much the youngest team lead. Filtered through partners, assistants, slowly grew the team over time.
Yeah.
And then I think really when we kind of started to hit our stride and I had like good agents, a good experience under me, was early 2020. I remember vividly having a meeting with my team being like, This is our year. We got it. We have we have everything together. We know the questions, we have the clients, and then COVID happened and sort of like knocked everything off the table.
Yeah.
And then we rebuilt it and started to do like very well, I would say 2022-ish. And then we changed the name to Trove and sort of rebranded it as a company within a company like 2.5 years ago. And it's been pretty great since then.
How did you, obviously you said you were one of the youngest team leads at the time you started.
Yeah.
How did you kind of use that to your advantage? Was it a major detriment? I would imagine certain clients were tentative to kind of work with somebody so young. So how did you work within that paradigm?
I always say that real estate it doesn't really matter your age per se. It matters how long you've been in the business.
Yeah.
So if you start at 40, you're kind of starting in the same place as 22. Maybe you have a little bit more money under you. Maybe you have a little bit better of a network, but you still have to learn the same things. Right. You still have to like pivot your network's mentality of who you are and what you do. And I think it was a little bit easier for me that real estate's the only thing I ever did. So everyone in my network had always known me as a real estate broker.
Right.
And I have like the longest time since I started of any of my friends or anyone in my network, which is good. Obviously, being young comes with the expectation or the thought that you're inexperienced, so you have to fight against that. But there's also a lot of positives that come with being young, right?
Right.
Especially in the era that we are working, or the world that we're working in today. Like we're theoretically better at tech, we're faster, we're more responsive, we understand the internet, we are faster on social, like all these things that a lot of sellers want.
Yeah.
We honestly are a little bit more adept than someone who's been in the business for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Coupled with that, we kind of like understand how things are marketed these days. And I think that helps, or at least I was able to use that to my advantage when I was starting out.
Yeah.
Last thing is real estate's about energy. So like if you're young and hungry, it's actually really helpful and you can sort of pivot that to your benefit in a lot of these clients' eyes.
So your focus is the luxury market. Before we kind of talk more specifics, what's your big picture view of the state of the luxury market in New York City right now? How has it changed, if at all, since COVID?
It changes day by day. So I'm going to give you an answer of today.
Let's definitely start with today.
Yeah.
And then we can branch out from there.
And that I would say it's extremely bifurcated. It's very broken down by neighborhood and very broken down by property type. So it's kind of like a long answer that I'm going to give you. The tastes, well, you asked me, I guess, since COVID, right? I think that the wealthy have gotten significantly wealthier. like to a crazy degree that people write about, but maybe do not necessarily see firsthand to the degree that we see firsthand.
It's easier for you to see it because there's finite differences between like 10 million, 20 million, 50 million that you can actually articulate versus it being some vague concept to somebody who's making, you know, a middle class, upper middle class salary.
Exactly. The top of the market is collecting houses. They want things that are bigger and bigger. The majority of the transactions are happening off market. They're incredibly attentive to security and discretion. I would say more than I've ever been involved with before.
Every purchase is a trust or an LLC.
Supremely secretive. Yeah. A lot of fear of their names getting out. That's like a huge piece of what we do is based around discretion.
Is that because, I know that I'm cutting you off in the middle of your answer, but is that because of social media and just how public everything is?
I think it's a piece of it. Yeah. I think also there's been, obviously, like the political winds in New York have moved to the left, and there's become a little bit more of this like eat the rich, tax the rich mentality. So people are a little bit less open and willing to like show and flaunt their wealth because they tend to make themselves targets. They also have, there's like genuine security concerns for them a lot of times. Like you have CEOs getting shot, you have CEOs getting Molotov cocktails thrown on their properties. Yeah. It does actually trickle through to these people and they start to think about it. So that's a big piece of it. It's really fascinating because if you go back to like a long time, like 60 years ago, right? When you had sort of society in New York and people would buy co-ops and the co-ops required you to buy in your own name. And it was like very public. It was like in the society papers, who was buying what. And it was sort of thought of as entering into society if you bought something big. We're in the complete opposite scenario now. People want like total discretion even when they're looking at things and they don't want anyone to know what they're doing.
Right. Well, like one big ticket purchase, it doesn't just exist on a newspaper and then talked about it like social gatherings. It filters through this really toxic social media culture where the purchase can be perverted in 100 different ways by 100 different people and come out the other end as something totally different than how it's sold.
Yeah, it's certainly not celebrated. I would
Certain
say.
people, but yeah.
So that's a big piece of it. And then a big thing that I sort of am constantly reminding my sellers and anyone I talk to is that New York is just one of the craziest producers of wealth. And everyone thinks there's all these foreign buyers, international buyers, like safety deposit boxes. It's not that. It's largely New Yorkers making money here. And if there's been any significant shift in who is buying, I would say the rise of the younger tech buyer has become much more prominent since COVID as these people have become more and more mobile.
Right.
And there's been just crazy amounts of wealth created, obviously, in AI and tech and IPOs and everything. A lot of those buyers are buying in New York. And they're kind of between like New York, San Francisco, Miami, sometimes New York and Austin. But they're Americans, right? Yeah. They're not using these apartments as safety deposit boxes. They just have a few apartments or houses.
So how has kind of the market shifted, if at all, with significant global events over the last couple of years? I don't want to say they're all Trump caused, but certainly related to the beginning of the Trump administration, tariffs, more unrest in the Middle East, issues kind of pervasive, anti-Semitism, anti-Islamophobia on college campuses. We're talking about like the highest end of the market, and the feeling is that they might be insulated from some of these issues. Do you find that, or is there connective tissue between pricing, demand, and what's happening in the world right now?
So I have a different answer for each of those events, frankly. Because they all affect the market in a different way.
I should be asking more concise questions. I am the lawyer, but
but it's actually like it's a good answer, I think. Certain events cause our market to get better, and certain events cause it to get more difficult. But it really depends what you're selling, and what you're buying, and who you're working with. I say that there's always on the fringe of the market, there's 10% of people that are going to tell you it's the end of the world and you're idiotic to buy and sell anything whenever. Yeah. There's always something, right? We're going to get past the tariffs and then it's going to be the midterms. We're going to get past the midterms and it's going to be the war and then it's going to be the war and it's going to be the election. Like there's always a thing to talk about. So realistically, those 10% of unrealistic people, they're just going to sit for the most part.
They're looking for an excuse.
They're always looking for some sort of excuse or they're looking for some sort of deal, right? And maybe one day they'll be right. Yeah. But like for my entire career, they haven't necessarily been right yet. And certain things we'll call shifts, right? like COVID caused a shift. Just to take the example of like the college campuses, for instance, that specific thing caused a shift in New York, basically mostly Jewish people who became more afraid and felt that the city was unsafe, and more people that I felt were hypermobile and could go to Florida. So I called this a little bit of like the Palm Beach effect, where usually I get people pulling out or pulling back from deals when it's the winter in New York City, and Palm Beach is amazing. And then they're all sitting around the table in Palm Beach saying, New York feels unsafe. New York is dirty. New York is dangerous. The political winds in New York are shifting the wrong way. They pull out of deals, right? But then sort of miraculous thing happens where like New York gets nice again and Palm Beach gets a little bit less busy and less fun, and they come back and they want to sort of be a part of it. And then all of a sudden New York becomes a bit more palatable, and they tend to like pull back on that. So that's a little bit more of like a seasonal thing. Elections always cause the market to slow down and then speed up again in a faster way than they should right after the election, because you remove the uncertainty from the market. Right. The one interesting thing that I've seen in the past couple of months is like this war in Iran that's now caused to become sort of a messy war across the entire Middle East. I'm literally seeing people come to look in New York to buy real estate because they had places in Dubai. So historically, people that had lived in London moved to Dubai are like, okay, there's this kind of like drone fear now. So maybe I'll move to New York where it seems safer and further from this. I've met 2 people so far.
Until we get drones in New York.
Until we get drones in New York.
Inevitable as well.
Yeah. And then the last thing is I think the luxury market sort of performs consistently based on how much money these people are making. And they've just made so much money, and the stock market continues to perform very high, very well. They still look at New York as a pretty stable asset. So buying New York real estate is a way to hedge against potential bounces in the stock market and potential like volatility because of politics and wars. I think that that's largely the reason that this market has performed pretty well this year, because there's like this fear of volatility.
Yeah. So it sounds like at least the New York City luxury market is mostly insulated from a lot of global events to the extent that it doesn't cause a downward shift in the stock market.
Yeah, exactly. That's the key point you just made. Yeah. If the stock market takes a massive fall, then of course it's going to be reflected in real estate.
Well, since we're talking about political headwinds, I know I do want to talk a little bit more about the luxury market itself. In the news has obviously been, I think they've been calling it like the Mamdani tax on second homes in New York City. It's really Governor Hochul's tax on second homes. I know you've spoken about this in the media a little bit. To what extent is that having an impact in the market? And do you anticipate if it happens, if it passes, which I think it's more likely than not that some variation of it will. It's one of those, like, it appears to be one of those 80-20 issues that everybody can kind of get around other than the people that are impacted by it.
Yeah.
Do you anticipate a major impact in the market, or is it going to be one of those things where once it's the new normal, it's just kind of assumed by pricing and things carry on as normal?
So I think in the short term, it'll cause a friction in the market. In the long term, it'll become very normalized, and the market will readjust as it needs to, which has always been the case when taxes have changed.
Is there a lot of freak out right now?
Well, first of all, this is the first time this has been proposed in my career, right? So I'm telling everyone to take a deep breath and like, let's just wait and see and watch and make sure it passes and understand exactly what's going to pass. There's a lot of question marks around it. Right? How things are valued, what happens if your kid is using the apartment, all of these different questions, which people are asking me. I do have several clients who are looking for second homes who are just kind of, they're fun looking, right? They don't need anything today. They don't need anything next year. Like they have the money. If they want an apartment in New York, if they rent, fine. If they buy, fine. A couple of them have pulled back from the market because they want to wait and see what happens. I have had people that have apartments priced slightly above $5 million, like my listings or potential listings that are $5 to $6 million, consider where they're pricing it because they have to take this into consideration. Right. And I've also had people in negotiations in the past week bring it up as a negotiating point. With all that being said, the luxury market had an extremely strong week last week. I didn't lose any deals because of it. The data is completely working against the logic that many people would think. And I think what the effect this is going to have on the market is probably not great, like net for what the ultimate goal is for this tax, right? It's to make some money for the city, but they came into office wanting to create more affordable housing and help the rental market. I think this will have a couple of effects on the market. One, I think it will make the market under $5 million more competitive, which it already is relatively competitive. But theoretically, that's the portion of the market that the more like normal full-time New Yorkers should be buying in. So I think you're going to have more wealthy pied-à-terre buyers buying those apartments because they're not going to want to break above 5 million. I think you'll see a lot of those types of deals, right? Which just makes that market more competitive.
Yeah.
Secondarily, I think it's going to make the rental market insane. The rental market is already, if you speak to most brokers, insane. I've never experienced a rental market like this, even when everybody was moving back after COVID. I've never felt it like this.
The luxury rental market or the entire?
It's honestly the entire rental market, but I think it's acutely crazy in the luxury rental market. The inventory is like zero, to the point where I had a client call me and say, "Hey, I'm looking on the rental market. Is there a new website besides StreetEasy that people post rentals on now?" And I was like, "No, there's just no apartments."
Is there hidden inventory or there are?
Not really.
Not really.
The rental market doesn't really function with off-market inventory. Maybe we get a heads up a couple of days before something rents or goes on the market to rent, but like largely the concept of an off-market rental is not really a thing. People will beg me for off-market rentals all the time, and I'm just very honest with them. Like, the way that the market works, if you put it onto the market, it will very likely rent in a day or two. So there's no real reason to have things off market.
Right.
You're going to get the highest and best number by putting it onto the market.
What about on the sales side? Is there this concept of a hidden inventory?
Significant and growing every day.
Why is that? And talk us through that.
Oh, I could spend the entire hour on that.
Okay, well, let's save it like a few minutes.
I think the reason for all of the off-market inventory is, one, at the way top of the market, these people have multiple homes, and some of them have like 10 homes in the city, right? So selling one doesn't necessarily change their lifestyle at all. They would be willing to accept an offer, usually at an above market number, to sell something. But it's not necessarily going to be sitting on the open market or like willingly marketed by them.
So how do you, when you're repping a buyer client, how do you find those?
Brokers, connections, financial advisors, talent managers, art advisors, friends. Any number of lawyers, any number of people, podcasts, call me.
If you have that 11th home that you just want to get rid of,
I'm your guy
to call.
Yeah, it's mostly just like connections and information.
Yeah.
That's one piece of it. I think two, there are just so many real estate brokers in New York City. Real estate brokers are probably not going to love that I say this, but I think they overuse the off-market inventory as a way to maintain importance, right? So they like hold things in their back pocket so that they're needed. That's a piece of it. Pricing testing is also a piece of it, and the concept of days on market. So the longer something is on the market, the more people assume that there's something wrong with it or it's overpriced, which can usually have a long-term negative value effect on the apartment or house.
That's something that I've heard about a lot, and obviously, something that you also. I'm not in the New York City market, but like even the suburban market, that's an issue. The housing market,
huge issue.
Does it have the same impact on the luxury side as it does in the $1 to $5 million range, or is there a different analysis when it comes to luxury residences with respect to time on market?
I think there's an expectation that things that are priced that are more expensive are going to take longer to sell. So the buyer pool is a little bit less sensitive to days on market, but they still are sensitive to days on market, particularly the brokers that represent them.
The sophistication also with respect to like what it means to be on market, maybe goes up a little bit too, right?
Yeah. I would say it's a bit less acute in the luxury market, but it still is absolutely a thing. And then there's just the sheer privacy aspect of it where people don't, but you said this before with the social media and the internet, like the moment you put photos online, I don't even know what websites my listings are on at this point, right? They get picked up and like AI kicks them across the web.
Yeah.
So that plus social media, it's like a little bit strange sometimes for people to have their kid's bedroom like in a million places on the internet that you can no longer undo. So that's a final piece of it. So there's just like a lot of different factors that go into people wanting to hold things back from going onto the open market.
I want to talk a little bit about a Bloomberg piece earlier this year about Manhattan mega mansions, which are really about very wealthy people converting adjacent units in usually a condo or entire townhouse floors into kind of horizontal mansions versus stacking, duplexes, triplexes in a skyscraper. Do you think the definition of luxury living is changing a little bit or morphing a little bit to accommodate kind of what people want, which is more of this horizontal bespoke apartment feel versus the super tall stacked box model?
I think tastes are changing.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think
is that generational, do you think, or is it some other factor that I'm not thinking of?
You could say it's generational. I think it's honestly just like as time passes, tastes evolve, and people start to realize and spread amongst their networks what's working for them and what's not working for them. So if you go back to like the original, when people was into vertical living, they were trying to put houses into apartment buildings, right? Pre-war co-ops are essentially houses. They're gracious. They have storage space. They have separation. They have living, dining, kitchen, like staff rooms. They're gracious homes. And then sort of as like the advent of the condominium came about and all this new development in the city, and there was so much rush to people wanting to buy condominiums and with amenities, the apartments got kind of smaller and smaller, and they become less livable.
They're a place to they're like a hotel almost. It's
overnight, and people were willing to use the city as their living room, so they were willing to live in an 1,800 square foot 3-bedroom with 2 kids. Then COVID happened, and a lot of these people moved to houses for a bit, and they got a little bit used to having like basements and separation and yards and bigger closets and bigger spaces.
Yeah.
So then I started to have people come back to the city and feel like their apartments were really small. And they were used to having the additional rooms. So during that time, people started to buy bigger apartments or combine things. But the people that really have 3 or 4 kids, it's super hard to find that space in an apartment. We just literally don't have like the lot sizes for it. So they started to move into townhouses, right? So people started to get townhouses, and townhouses are between 18 and 25 feet wide usually, and they're vertical. They're 5-6 stories tall. So it's great for a certain style of living, but I think ultimately as people's either kids get older or they're in them for a period, 1, they have security questions around being on the street. 2, they find that they're up and down stairs a lot. 3, they find that they don't use a large portion of the house. So like if it's on the top or the bottom, they're saying they're living on like 2 or 3 floors. And they actually at that point don't have that much like lateral entertaining space. So more and more people have started to replicate or tried to replicate the concept of like a Greenwich mansion while staying in the city, whether that's buying 2 or 3 houses in a row and knocking them together so they have bigger, grander spaces and they don't have to be up and down stairs all the time, or combining 2 big apartments in a condominium, combining 2 or 3 floors so they can get the concept of townhouse living but have all the amenities in doorman. And I think just this has all been exacerbated by the growth of wealth and the ability that people have to buy these things.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that you tied this to COVID, because now that you're saying it, I can see it. That there was this temporary flight to the suburbs, as evidenced by the fact that like the market came back very quickly. The leasing market is not come back. People are back in the city.
For sure. It's a distant memory. Yeah,
right. It's a distant memory, but then it is interesting that like the mental impact of being like temporarily suburban has found its way into the urban market. That's not something I've heard before, but it resonates and it makes a lot of sense. What do you think right now are kind of the primary factors in the luxury market for? You said there's a hidden inventory, but there's also a limited inventory, right? If you want to be successful in the luxury market, both on the sales side, and if you want to be the first buyer to like grab that perfect listing in a day or two, like what are you doing on both ends of the market?
From a broker's perspective, a lot of it has to do with just we traffic in information and connections, basically, right? So you have to have a baseline knowledge of what's on the market and what's coming to the market. And then you also just have to be connected to the brokerage community. And the brokerage community is going to be your best friend when it comes to delivering you information, right? So I am in like WhatsApp groups, group chats, Instagram groups, email lists, you name it.
As many group chats as you can find.
Weekly Zooms, lunches, whatever, just to talk about what's coming to the market, what you have off market, what's being built, what developers are doing, so that you just know what's coming onto the market or know it's potentially available. You have to have that information, because when a buyer wants something that doesn't exist on the open market, frequently people will come to me and say, I don't want you to show me anything that I've seen on the market. They've already seen everything.
And that's your, as AI has and continues to enter the picture, That's your value add, right?
100%. That's the biggest value add.
Not going to lunch with, at least not yet. Not
Yeah.
going to lunch with other broker. Maybe
Give it till 2030. Yeah, that's a big piece of it.
Yeah.
But then there's also just the knowledge of what's being built in the city. So if I go back to like 2014, 15, when I was first in the business, a huge piece of our business, because the market was going up so fast, was getting buyers into new developments first. So we did like really significant tracking of like DOB, website filings, landmarks, commission filings of what was being built.
Getting
that we knew.
Offering price before the prices were adjusted up.
Exactly. Right. You're in less of a scenario now where like the prices jump super fast throughout the process. But if you have someone that wants something large or wants something, a couple apartments put together or wants something custom, you kind of have to be the first one in the door.
Yeah. That's where AI, I would imagine, can really help, right?
Can definitely help.
Yeah.
Like if you just take, for example, I can be like, this is maybe a little wonky, but if you want something large on the Upper East Side right now, you want 6,000 square foot apartment in a condo. It doesn't exist. None of them are left, right? They're all sold. So you have to kind of know that like Spitzer might be building a building on 80th Street. Naftali's building a building on 59th Street. Like Backlow's building a building on 69th Street. There's some apartments that are going to be built. And then there's like Douglaston's building on 3rd Avenue. There's these buildings that are coming up. Some of them are out of the ground. Some of them are not. Some of them, they're still waiting for tenants to leave the buildings. But like I was talking to one of these developers who still has tenants to buy out of his building. He hasn't even knocked down the first building. He hasn't even started. He's like, I have such crazy interest in this penthouse from so many people because there was just some rendering that was leaked online. So like the buyer buildup at that price point is crazy, and you have to really be like 3 years, 4 years early to them.
Yeah. That's where the lack of privacy on social, the interconnectivity of everybody can be used to kind of build up demand for things.
Exactly.
That rational there might not be demand for otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. And then the kicker to that is that people are petrified to do renovations. There's plenty of huge apartments that somebody could come in and do a full gut renovation for, but it just takes so much time, energy, and money that there's a pretty serious lack of desire of doing that.
Well, before I let you go, you and Michael have built a top rate team pretty quickly. You're frequently quoted all over the news. What's your approach? I always like to ask entrepreneurs about how they've grown their business, how they're looking to scale, how they're factoring in what's coming down the pipeline. Obviously, I'm sure AI is first and foremost in your mind, how to leverage it, how to compete with it, how to differentiate yourself in the market. So what have you done? What are you going to continue to do to kind of scale the business?
So we try to work a couple of ways, and I'm not going to act like this is like wild rocket science that I've solved. I think in real estate, you need to be ethical, honest, and knowledgeable, non-pressuring, and you need to, most important thing, just do what you say you're going to do. There's a lot of brokers that promise a lot of things that they don't deliver on.
Yeah.
And I think over time, if you can add value, if you can figure out what people already know on their own and give them information that they need to know that they don't know on their own, you can do it in an ethical, calm way, and you actually follow up on what your promises are, you will over time be successful. Does it help to be well connected? Yes. Does it help to work extremely hard? Yes. Does it help to be very, very contactable? Yes. All of those things like give you a little bit of a boost, but it's pretty simple. It's just like consistency. You know, I was a college swimmer my whole life. And I always kind of use this analogy, like swimmers don't necessarily need to be born the most athletic or coordinated people. There's always like the kid who just worked his ass off and is like the first one in a practice and the last one to leave and got pretty good.
Yeah.
Sometimes got to the Olympics. Maybe not that like natural of an athlete. Real estate's pretty similar. It's like the more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. So if you really like pour your heart and soul into it and do it the right way, you will eventually be pretty successful.
Yeah, I think the piece of advice that's often like missing for so many leaders or people in professional services is the do what you say you're going to do piece.
I know. Yeah.
Because I think there's this feeling among people who rely on sales for their business that, all right, once I have the person sign the dotted line or commit to me, I can move on to the next sale. But the best way to scale is by making that person happy, by delivering on the promises you made when you first sold them on you. Otherwise, it's going to catch up to you. You're basically playing a shell game if you're making all these misplaced promises and just lining up as many people as possible.
And that's honestly the hardest thing about scaling and growing, because like you really have to try and keep your promise to everybody.
You do. It's something that I think, even we strive to do and struggle with, and sometimes that's why I'm up till 2 a.m. responding to emails.
Yeah.
But I totally agree with that. Well, look, this is great. And if people want to find out more about you, your team, kind of figure out what's off market, and available to them, where should they go? What should they do?
You can email me. My email is slater@trove-partners.com, or you can text me. My phone number is all over the internet, or you can go to our website.
And the website is?
Trove-partners.com.
Okay, awesome. Well, we will, if the 5 million and up tax passes, we'll want you to come back on to talk about the.
I will happily come back. I think give it a couple of weeks to see how it shakes out.
Yeah.
This might not be an immediate reaction. We'll be in some other war by then as well. So
I'm sure we will. Well, it was great to see you. Great to talk a little bit, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
For more on all things real estate and the law, subscribe to this and our other podcasts. Follow Bergstein, Flynn, Knowlton, and Polina on social media. Subscribe to our newsletter and go to bfklawoffice.com. That's bfklawoffice.com to learn more.